I'm very honored to be here today because I'm not very familiar with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Do I say it well?
You said it
yes,
very
okay.
well.
So it's in my country. I'm from the Netherlands, but it's not. I'm not very familiar with it. But of course, I know it. And when I got the invitation, I thought, oh, that's very interesting, because I think women's rights are very important, but also freedom of religion is a very important topic for me. And in this, I think it was in November, we had an event with Anastasia of Open Doors, and it was also about freedom of religion and specific positions of women. And then I thought, I have to know more about it. So when you sent me the opportunity to organize this event, I thought, this is perfect, we have to do that. So I did not know how many people would come, but if I see this, this is amazing. So very welcome, and I'm very grateful in the first place to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because without them, we wouldn't have been here today. And of course, you know, later this week, on the 8th of March, we will have the International Women's Day, and therefore it's perfect to have this event in this week. On Friday it was not possible, but on Monday is also, it's the first day of the week, so it's the start of the International Women's Week. And I think we have very distinguished guest speakers today. I'm very happy to have them here. And the agenda will be as following. We first have a keynote speaker, and she is sitting on the right to me, Mrs. Camille N. Johnson. Very welcome. And I will introduce you. And then we have our first panels. They are sitting on the left to me. And I will introduce them. And afterwards we will have some Q&As and some discussion. And then we have a second round with panelists, and they are sitting to the right of me. So, and then we will stop at 5 sharp. So, or earlier, but not later. And so it's really a pleasure to me to announce our first speaker. I told your name already, Mrs. Camille N. Johnson. And you currently serve as the president of the Relief Society. I hope I say it well.
Yes.
And this is the organization for women within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with nearly 8 million members worldwide. I did not know that it had so many members, but 8 million. And I read that you have been serving in the church for a long time in different positions. So I'm very, curious what you're going to tell us. So the floor is yours.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. I am honored and humbled to be with you this afternoon and in celebration of International Women's Day. I believe that women have been blessed with a unique moral compass, and that women possess special spiritual gifts and propensities to sense human needs, to comfort, teach, and strengthen. Accordingly, each of our communities depend upon ordinary women for human flourishing as they perform their unique roles as leaders, teachers, nurturers, healers, and peacemakers. For those ordinary women upon whom we depend, let us grapple today with a profound problem, one that is too often overlooked by contemporary observers, commentators, and journalists. It is this: nationalizing cultures that are hostile to minority religious beliefs and secularizing cultures that are antagonistic to religion generally, when coupled with government restrictions on religious institutions and religious exercise, have devastating effects on society generally and on women specifically. Social scientists have shown that to the extent societies and governments restrict religious freedoms, social conflict increases. Such conflict and ensuing violence always harm the most vulnerable, including women and children. It destabilizes economies and households. It increases inequality, including gender inequality, and it keeps women from using their innate gifts to cultivate peace. The historical record and the empirical record are clear. Efforts to maintain social order by forcing homogeneity of belief or restricting beliefs always backfire, resulting in conflict and the tragic destruction of human potential. So today, I want to explore with you what this problem means, in particular for women, what it suggests about what is needed for women to flourish, and then invite you to envision a world in which women cultivate, use, and expand their natural gifts, empowered to participate in a global sisterhood of peacemakers. If ordinary women are to accomplish their unique daily peacekeeping roles, they themselves need to be inspired, nurtured, healed, empowered, and taught about their divine potential. This wellspring will come, this wellspring will come from their ability to seek daily, if not hourly, inspiration in the way their conscience dictates. They must be able to live according to their highest aspirations and values, and together share and organize for mutual support. This, of course, is what robust freedom of religion and belief affords. The assurance to women and men and children that they can live conscientious moral lives with the mutual support of fellow believers while affording that same dignity to their neighbors. So imagine with me what would happen if every woman felt empowered within her sphere of influence to live out the full measure of her special gifts and propensities for nurture, care, healing, teaching, and leading. Imagine what would happen if we, as women in leadership roles, could unleash the full power of women to transform their personal inspiration into organized action. What would happen in homes, in schools, in congregations, in communities, and in nations? What would happen with efforts to end poverty, eliminate hunger, assure public health, provide education, and reduce inequalities? And imagine the opposite, a reality in far too many communities, a world where women live in fear of social persecution and official restrictions stifle their expression of conscientious belief and prevent them from assembling to worship and organize to provide mutual support. In such an environment, women's collective capacity to address complex problems and lift society is vastly diminished, and individual hopes and aspirations are dashed. While freedom of religion and belief is stabilizing and empowering, it is not without its complexities. I recognize that cynical reliance on religion, on freedom of religious practice and belief, has been used to justify horrific acts against women, such as genital mutilation and honor killings. These acts, in religion's name, fail to acknowledge the seamless dignity of all human rights. The World Conference on Human Rights states unequivocally that all human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent. On this point, I concur with my predecessor, the 17th president of the Relief Society, Jean B. Bingham. When she spoke at the European Parliament in 2017, she noted, quote, "It is entirely possible to protect religious freedom but punish the perpetrators of harmful practices against women. The principle of religious freedom does not condone crime, including crimes against women. In fact, faith can be, and often is, a vital comfort to those who are victimized, who are disproportionately women." Close quote. I also recognize that passionate religious belief has been used to recruit and radicalize populations, including women, into extremist positions that threaten stability and peace. There are no simple answers to this concern, and I won't pretend to resolve them today. But these concerns seem most prevalent where social norms have frayed, where scarcity and conflict are the baseline, and where the full spectrum of human rights are threatened. These extreme situations are not a reason to restrict religious freedom. Instead, we should recognize them as a warning sign that we need to better understand the plight of women so affected. We must better communicate with and actually empower our sisters in these desperate situations to reach across social divisions to solve problems. In almost all instances, when society or governments restrict women from living out their rights of conscience, we can expect poorer outcomes within the home, with public health, with education, and with civil society. By extension, when religious freedom for women is protected, we can expect better outcomes in all of those domains. But the fruits of such freedom go far beyond mere material well-being, because religion and spirituality constitute what is richest in humanity. Religion and spirituality connect us with the divine, finding expression through art, music, poetry, scripture, prayer, and devotions. And through these expressions, they connect us to one another. I believe that our shared womanhood provides yet another sacred connection. As women, we exist in an oft unspoken global sisterhood. The tides and seasons of our biology and the universality of the way we bear and nurture humanity connect us wordlessly across cultural divides, language barriers, and political chasms. They create a common experience where no other obvious bridges may exist. Because of the connectedness of women and of humanity's highest aspirations, I submit that the religious freedom of women is a key component to global peace. Our implicit sisterhood creates an ability to build on common ground which forms the basis of peace, a peace that is more than coexistence in the absence of war, but something much more beautiful and powerful, bringing individuality into a unified whole. I make that bold claim not out of wishful thinking, but from my lived experience as the current president of the president of the Relief Society for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one of the world's largest and oldest women's organizations. The Relief Society now consists of nearly 8 million members, organized within more than 30,000 congregations across the globe. I have seen how this faith-based organization inspires women to unite in providing consistent acts of service within their homes and communities. I have seen what our women do when they are able to express their fullest selves and connect with others through our joint sisterhood. I have seen women elevate one another in the midst of poverty. I have seen women care for, feed, and nurture children who are not their own. I have seen women stand to protect others from the ravages of war. When it lives up to its high aspirations, our sisterhood provides the practical means of fulfilling Jesus Christ's admonition to love our neighbors as ourselves, thereby providing the conditions for lasting peace and human flourishing. Let me provide some specific examples. In the last decade, during the refugee crisis in Europe, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints across Europe pooled their time, talent, and treasure to assist many of the displaced people flooding into Europe because of regional conflict, human rights abuses, and devastating economic hardship. Particularly noteworthy was the way that Relief Society members in the UK and France were moved to provide consistent, meaningful material and organizational support regardless of ethnicity or religious background in order to alleviate desperate conditions in the migrant camps. Although they came from different countries, cultures, and faith traditions, the common bond of faith was a critical aspect of why this support was particularly meaningful. Latter-day Saint women were attuned to the importance of honoring and accommodating the religious commitments of these refugees. Knowing the importance of their own faith-based commitments, Latter-day Saint women who helped to organize relief in these camps assured that religious prohibitions and preferences in food were provided for and labeled clearly, that clothing and personal items provided were culturally appropriate and avoided symbols or imagery that might offend certain belief systems, that separate spaces were provided for different faith groups to observe religious practices, and that communal living arrangements respected religious requirements. Such responsiveness is not uncommon or unique for the sisters in our organization. In the Philippines, Latter-day Saint women, concerned about the high prevalence of malnutrition in their communities and how it was affecting their own families, learned more about the devastating lifelong consequences of malnutrition. Moved by their love and united by their faith, leaders of local congregations moved to action. With strong encouragement from the women of the Relief Society, leaders learned about the most common causes of malnutrition. Congregations hosted nutritional screenings in church buildings for member families and their neighbors, and then taught parents about good nutrition and referred those in need to local medical and community services that would provide treatment. These local efforts have been complemented with the church's humanitarian support for organizations that treat malnutrition and promote good nutrition throughout the Philippines. What started as a local church-led project to help member children has rippled far beyond those Filipino congregations. This effort is currently being implemented in over 1,000 congregations in 12 countries. More than 14,000 children have been screened for malnutrition. Additional congregations are scheduled to launch child nutrition efforts in the Caribbean, Latin America, Africa, and Asia in the coming months. Indeed, drawing in no small part for the inspiration of this initiative, the Relief Society leads a church-wide humanitarian initiative to address the basic needs of women and children. We collaborate with other global organizations to prioritize maternal and newborn care, child nutrition, immunizations, and education throughout the world. While we can and will use our global reach to scale these women-inspired efforts, I believe that the most important and impactful work of women continues to be done when we care for our own children, teach a friend to read, patiently address the needs of an elderly neighbor, prepare a meal for the sick, or cry with a sister who is grieving. I strive to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. I believe he came to earth to save humanity from sin and death and to lift us in our sorrow and distress. His daily discipline, however, was always to reach out to those in anguish, one by one. In private conversation with the socially outcast Samaritan woman, pausing to comfort the hemorrhagic woman in the crowd, privately healing the young daughter of Jairus. In trying to emulate Jesus, I recognize that while my current work involves broad organizational efforts to improve conditions generally for women and children around the world, Christ's most important requirement for me, as his disciple, is to recognize the immediate individual needs around me and respond with patience and love. I do that best when I am motivated spiritually and when I can freely unite with others in meaningful ways to address concerns. So my call to action today is simple and personal. While we must act justly and responsibly in our roles as women leaders, let us not neglect the individuals within our immediate circle of care. I urge you to pause with me for a moment and connect, however you do that, with your highest source of inspiration, and then wait quietly for guidance about whose life you can meaningfully improve today with an act of compassion. Write it down. Act on it. I hope that simple exercise will help us recognize that our greatest success will be in unleashing the power of our global sisterhood by unleashing the power of women as expressed through faith and conscience. Women who express such faith from any faith tradition or spiritual background will then undoubtedly serve those around them. This service, especially when rendered alongside women of faith and across cultural divides, will empower the peacemaking capacity of our global sisterhood. Women's engagement in their congregations and families and communities will create a wave of empathy and compassion. The sisterhood of women, unburdened by prejudice and oppression, can unite across boundaries through the simplest of acts. Now for us in this room, from our unique vantage as women leaders, we can and must also assess and address concerns at a societal level. We can and must seek for ways to remove unnecessary burdens and restrictions on women. We can and must stand for freedom of religion and belief. We cannot, however, reach every person in the world, no matter how well funded our programs, well penned our policies, or well developed our diplomacy. But through our global sisterhood, we can reach every single soul. Empowering women's freedom of religion and belief helps us to achieve our highest aspirations. Reaching across faith boundaries builds peace and empowers our global sisterhood. Friends, we can achieve what no government can: a sisterhood, a global sisterhood of peacemakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Camille, for your beautiful words. I think we are connected in Jesus, and what you said is that we have to love our neighbors as ourselves, and it's a sentence I often pronounce because I think it's one of the most important things to do, and you are connecting it with women and how we should work together and inspire the world, especially as leaders. So thank you very much for your encouraging words. And we're not going to discuss it now, but I can imagine that you have questions or you want to talk to her. We can do it afterwards, because first we have a panel, and I have 3 speakers. And this panel is about courageous women, and women who have faced and surmounted challenges in exercising their faith or belief. And we have 3 excellent speakers who will share their stories with us. And the first speaker is Mrs. Rachel Bayani. And that are you? Yes. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I know, you have been the representative of the Bahá'í, do I pronounce it well? Yeah? International Community's regional office in Brussels for more than 10 years now. And before coming to this position, you have been serving in a wide range of diplomatic positions throughout Europe. And the second speaker will be Mrs. Helene Fisher, she's sitting left to me. She is an expert on gender, women's rights, and religious freedom, and has been leading investigations and gender reports about this matter. and she's co-founder of the Gender and Religious Freedom Network and was previously affiliated with Open Doors. And talking about Open Doors, Mrs. Anastasia Hartman. She is the Brussels Advocacy Officer for Open Doors, and this is an international NGO promoting freedom of religion or belief and supporting Christians facing human rights violations on account of their faith. And she is a well-known figure in the Brussels circuit. We are meeting quite often, and you are active in the circuit for freedom of religion or belief, and I'm very happy that you are here today so we can get to know you much better now. So the first speaker is Mrs. Rachel Bayani. The floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. But just to start by really thanking the host, I think it's such an interesting subject, and I'm also enjoying the sight of seeing all the women speaking about sort of faith and freedom of religion or belief. I think the first step in better understanding the role of women in advancing freedom of religion or belief is really to address this common misperception that women's rights and freedom's rights are clashing rights, actually. And not only are freedom of religion and women's rights not clashing rights, and I'm not going to go into sort of a whole legal analysis as to why they're not, but it is often women of belief, whatever their belief, that are really fierce advocates of ensuring that women's rights and freedom of religion and belief rights are upheld at the same time. And I was asked to speak about the experience of Baha'i women. And by the way, I really enjoyed preparing this because it's rare that one gets to speak about stories. Usually it's always something a bit more abstract or conceptual. So to be able to tell stories, I think is a very interesting way to start a panel like that. So I was asked to speak about the experience of Baha'i women in a context where really their right to freedom of religion and belief, but also all of their other civil rights are denied, and that is Iran. Now, it is always difficult to speak about one experience, one particular experience, because one does not want to highlight one experience above another, because there's many experiences out there, many that are really worth mentioning from all sorts of sources, from all sorts of faith and beliefs or not beliefs. And so I just want to ask you to apologize, so accept my apologies for highlighting this particular experience. Of course, Baha'i women in Iran are particularly affected. Like their Baha'i brothers, they're not allowed to exercise their civil rights. They're not allowed public employment. They're denied their right to expression. They're denied their right to association. They're systematically arrested, tortured, and imprisoned on dubious charges. Their homes are expropriated, their land taken from them, their houses raided, they're not allowed to go to university, and once buried, although often refused burial, once buried, their graves are bulldozed. And this only and clearly because of their beliefs. Now, imagine all of the restrictions, and we've seen so much of that in the news recently, that women in Iran sort of are exposed to. And now take all of that and add all of what I've mentioned just to it. And then you get a glimpse of the experience of Baha'i women in Iran in the past decades. But really, I do not want to speak about how women of belief, whatever their belief, and when that belief is trampled on, are in some sense double victims. I really want to speak about how they have an irreplaceable role in advancing social transformation and promoting a culture of human rights. And in that sense, they're really not victims. And in this case, how Baha'i women, alongside their sisters of other beliefs in Iran, have been champions of human rights and social transformation. And I want to zoom back into the past a bit, and I want to start with the story of a renowned Iranian poetess with the title of Tahereh, who became a follower of the forerunner of the Baha'i faith in the first half of the 1800s. So We know what the country looks like now, and now imagine, zoom into the 1800s, into the beginning of it. She was so eager to learn about religion that her father, one of the most learned mullahs in Iran, taught her himself and later had a teacher for her, even though that was considered highly inappropriate. When she became a follower of this new religion, she soon gave speeches in front of masses of people, something unheard of for women at the time. The Iranian government took her prisoner. She was stoned in the streets, exiled from town to town, threatened with death, but she never failed in her determination to work for the freedom of her sisters. The Shah of Iran, Nasruddin Shah, had taken an interest in her and said that if she renounced her belief, he would make her his bride and give her an exalted place in his household. She was called into the presence of the Shah, and he said to her that day, "Why should you be a believer in this new religion?" And she replied not with her own words, but she quoted from the Quran with a quote that ends with, "Permit that I worship whom I wish, and you worship whom you wish." Shortly after, she was executed. But before that, to a minister of Iran, in whose house she was imprisoned, she said, "You can kill me as soon as you like, but you cannot stop the emancipation of women." As of then, Baha'i women, and of course men, in Iran continued to play really trying a role in trying to advance that education was accessible to all, so that all would have the necessary knowledge that would allow them to ensure the respect for human rights and become advocates for social transformation. And her admonition that the emancipation of women cannot be stopped became reality. At the time of her execution, 5% of the population in Iran was illiterate, and only 1/10 of that 5% were women. The first girls' school was then established by Baha'is in Ghazvin in 1870, which was 10 years before the first public girls' school. And interestingly, Ghazvin is also the birthplace of Tahirih. By 1894, Baha'is had opened 20 other girls' schools in other locations in Iran, and the schools were open to everyone, no matter their background or belief. And in many isolated places, these schools were the only existing option for education. Now, last year, the Bahá'í International Community launched the Our Story is One campaign. It was a social media campaign, and the purpose of which was to commemorate the execution of 10 young Baha'i women in Iran almost a century later. And really also to pay tribute to all of the women in Iran who with unwavering courage and determination stood up for their principles, even at the risk of their own lives. But I'm not going to go into this now. I know we were asked to give short and brief opening remarks, but maybe there's time later to zoom in today.
I think that would be very interesting because I did not know about this story in Iran, so that's very interesting. Thank you very much. And our second speaker is Anastasia or Helen?
Well, once again, may I just echo the thanks for hosting the panel and for bringing us together, because indeed, when I started out working in Open Doors in the area of women and FoRB, it would have been much more difficult to gather a panel like this and a group like this to hear about this. So for me, it's a real pleasure to be here today, 17 years later, and seeing the interest and the hosting that there is. As I was working with colleagues at the time, we were listening to stories from around the globe of women of faith. The women of faith that we were listening to were from Christian communities around the world, and we were hearing varied and horrific stories of how they were suffering because of their faith. And I would reiterate that Rachel Bayani said, because of their faith. And we began to notice patterns in how the women faced religious persecution. And they were different than the stories we heard of how men faced religious persecution. But all of that was anecdotal. All of that could be brushed aside. Well, yes, I know you heard it, but that's only in one context. Ah, yes, but that's very particular. Ah, yes, but don't you know that, on and on. So what did we need? What is solid? Global research is something that we trust, and in Open Doors, there's a part of it called World Watch Research, and at the time we had the opportunity to do that necessary global research, even though so many of the ways that people of faith experience religious persecution is deeply associated with shame. And that is what makes it so effective. Because when there is shame associated with religious persecution, then a culture of silence takes over, and the religious persecution is not reported. In fact, it is covered up by those who suffer it, and we know that that is thereby giving freedom to the perpetrators because they are never called to account. But the other reason we found that this was not actually treated was because all of those acts, different for men and women, covered in shame, is that as they were being done, they were also not able to be prosecuted, not just because of cultural shame, but a lack of rights, for example, for women, and prejudicial judicial systems, or parallel systems where a country would have signed up to an international treaty, but there would be parallel courts, maybe family courts, which meant that those treaty obligations never needed to be honored. And therefore, those who theoretically perhaps had freedom of religion or belief in the country were never able to find it in practice. So, all of that produced, as you said, a series of gender-specific religious persecution reports, which you can find on opendoors.org. And they will explain to you the ways in which men are characteristically persecuted and women are characteristically persecuted. Those reports exist as well for children and for refugees. What I found interesting in the years that followed, being invited to different events to speak, was that people of other faiths or no faiths would come and say, but this is the way we are persecuted. And that was of no surprise, because actually the way people are persecuted is not specific to their religion. The way people are persecuted is specific to the country's social norms, their political situation, their economic vulnerabilities. And therefore, it is likely that any minority religion in a repressive country will persecute all minority faiths using similar tactics, as long as they diminish the value, purpose, and acceptance of that person in their community. And I'll say that again, religious persecution targets what gives the person value, purpose, and acceptance within their community. Because if the persecutor can diminish that for the individual, then they threaten that person's place within the community. And if the community has those values that say your place is now diminished and they lose their place of belonging, then the community shatters. Families shatter. I could tell you so many stories from having traveled around the world, been in these communities, held the hands of these women, but also held the hands of these men who were suffering because of what was done, for example, to their women, and they hadn't been able to stop it. And therefore, those attacks against the women that are so associated with shame also attack the man in his feeling of shame and further destroy the family. These are the realities of what religious persecution looks like when it is gender specific. At the moment, I now work for an organization called Gender and Religious Freedom. Our CEO is here today. I hope you'll take the opportunity to talk to her. She has even more field experience than I do and can tell you so many stories. But one of the things that we got to is how do we therefore help organizations to be able to address these things and communities to become resilient and strong. We've developed any number of models, and one of them was based upon, if you're involved in international development, you'll know that the United Nations went from a model called Women in Development to a model called Gender and Development. One viewed women as victims, people who needed to be helped. The other viewed women as part of society, and the whole of society needed men and women together, needed to be grown strong together, but by addressing all of those things, those shame questions, those blame questions, those societal questions which get used to divide us. So many things I could say about the models that we're developing, about how change needs to be brought along levels of mindset, structure, and systems, and I hope we'll be able to get back to that later. But for now, I'll leave it to my other panelists.
Thank you very much for your interesting words, and I think there will be a lot of questions, but for later. Anastasia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's extremely humbling, and it's a great honor for me to sit in the panel among the women that I respect greatly. I'm very thankful to be here. My role is to do advocacy at the European institutions. Here today I represent Open Doors, and Open Doors in its turn represents the global persecuted church, Christians that suffer discrimination and persecution on account of their faith. I'm very grateful that Helen is here today because she really laid the foundation for the work that Open Doors has been doing for about 7 years now, I believe, producing findings on gender-specific religious persecution. And what we find over and over again is that for women and girls, Christian women and girls, but as you heard from Helen, it's not only Christian women and girls, their persecution and religious persecution against them is complex, it's hidden and violent. What we often find is that it's characterized by sexual violence, forced marriage, abductions, house arrests, invisible violence behind closed doors perpetrated by those that, by their home members, community members. The topic of this panel today is to highlight the stories of courageous women. And as I work for Open Doors, I hear a multitude of stories that just shake me to the bottom, whether it's a story of a Muslim background Christian lady somewhere in the Middle East that was arrested by her father, house arrested by her father because of converting to Christianity, whether it's an ex-hostage of Boko Haram somewhere in Nigeria, receiving trauma care in one of the safe houses and getting help for a baby who she got from one of the militants, whether it's a wife of a house church pastor in Iran, where Christians are not allowed to gather and worship freely in Persian, so they're confined to their homes, and then she's imprisoned together with her husband, interrogated harshly by a male guard, and threatened with life and safety of her children. All these stories are a demonstration of courage of these women, but it's also a demonstration of a high vulnerability of women with different backgrounds, because they do not only belong to a religious minority, or in the case of Nigeria, a particularly targeted religious community, but they also face other vulnerability factors such as language, ethnicity, honor shame culture that can be prevalent in their society. And this is something that we are speaking out for. I'm an advocate, so I really go out and speak. I'm not a researcher, and I'm very grateful that Anja and other MEPs that you're not shying away from these topics because they are extremely complex, and instead of shying away, we are addressing them. And we launch dialogues, we explore policy solutions here in the European Union. We also do it in the United Nations. We do it nationally in many countries across the globe. And what really is needed for this work is creativity, because the issue is quite complex. The causes are extremely complex, so should be the solutions. And I hope that today from this panel, I wish that to myself, but I wish that to everyone else, that we will just seek inspiration from the stories that we hear, because the paradox is, as I work, is that we are seeking to speak up or for these women, to empower them, but the reality is that they empower us to act. I feel it on a day-to-day basis that I'm challenged because of the courage that they show in their stories. And I just want to dedicate a couple of minutes to the findings of Open Doors, the recent ones. This is the latest report. It was released just a few days ago. I have a few copies here, so I'm happy to distribute them, but I can also send them via email to anyone interested. But this year, we have looked at the gender-specific religious persecution in a very specific context. We are looking at insecurity, because what we have noticed is that marginalized Christians, and especially women and girls, can be particularly vulnerable in the contexts such as settings of conflict, forced displacement, criminal violence. Such insecurity inflames existing injustices, and the way conflict or violence and religion can interact is actually through exacerbation of gender-specific religious persecution. And what we have attempted to do through the findings of this report is to look at the conflict situation in the shape of a triangle, or maybe a prism, if you wish, because it is important to see how religion and gender interact before the conflict, as it escalates, and as the conflict de-escalates, and what we can learn from it, and then how can it translate into our work. Because before the conflict, we look at existing patterns or pressure points, sort of manifestations of FoRB violations against male or female in the society. And then, as the conflict escalates, these pressure points, they do not go away. They actually become more prevalent, they become more intense, because of different things. It can be lack of rule of law during the conflict, suspension of functioning of official institutions, culture of impunity, which is promoted by ongoing violence, and also just general stress in the society because of the ongoing hostility. All these things make especially women and girls a lot more vulnerable. One of the examples is how it has been reported by our regional expert in the Sahel. Women and girls in the situation of a local conflict are particularly vulnerable to sexual violence, to abductions. Many of you, I'm sure, will know what happened in India with the rise, sudden rise of ethnic conflict between Meitei and Kuki in the Manipur state, and how women were particularly impacted by that violence. So we look at all these existing vulnerabilities and how they get basically just how they rise in the context of conflict, in the context of forced displacement as well. And then as the conflict de-escalates, that's a very important learning experience, because then we can actually see what Helen just mentioned. What role does gender play in peace building? How can women be actors of change, drivers of change? What is the role of local faith actors? Do they understand the gender element of religious persecution in times of conflict? Are they equipped to help, to provide aid? So all these things we are looking at in this report, and then they also translate into policy recommendations that then advocates like myself, we bring out to policymakers. And I'm happy to discuss it further today, but I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Applause for you all. Thank you very much. Before I open the floor for everybody, I have one question, because I'm a politician, so I'm very curious, of course, what should I do, and with my colleagues, what do you think the most important thing the European Parliament should do? Because what I notice, I'm here a member of the European Parliament since September last year, and when I talk about religion, there are lots of MEPs who they are irritated by the word religion. They want to talk about cultural violence, but when it is religion, they think no, it's not religious. They have some aversion against Christians or Muslims, etc. So it makes it very difficult to put it on agenda. I think we should do it. That's why we are here together this afternoon. But do you have some recommendations for me and my colleagues if they hear this? And afterwards, the floor is to everybody. So I don't know if there's one person who wants to.
Well, I'll start and then pass it over. It is, I don't think it's a secret that among all of the human rights, sometimes freedom of religion or belief is the poor cousin of the human rights world.
Yes,
and
exactly.
even though coming out as an advocate for the defense of freedom of religion or belief shouldn't be a second-class right, sometimes it is, and sometimes there is even, and often, all too often, there can be this misunderstanding that there is a clash between rights, as you were referring to earlier. Of course, we can explain how this isn't true, but what I think one of the things that we're getting is not actually an intellectual problem. It's more of a kind of personal problem, because here in Europe, so many people do not have a faith and therefore assume that life should be lived without a faith. And so discussing faith is something that is difficult, especially when there's so much in the world, so much violence in the world that becomes associated with religion. And therefore it becomes very difficult to discuss it. So actually, the question is, how do we get past that emotional barrier, perhaps more than the intellectual barrier? And as we do so, I would say that one of the things is, first of all, it is to go back to some of the intellectual, because actually it is a human right. There is defense of this, and we can explain all those complexities of how these different things interact. They're complex, but they're not unknowable. And therefore we can sit down and have a conversation about them, especially since most of the world that we're talking about, according to Pew Research, actually thinks that religion is what determines their beliefs and their values. Most of the world is religious. In some ways, it's only here in Europe that we're not religious.
In the western of Europe especially. Yes.
Right? And so there is a particular challenge here that there isn't elsewhere. So one of the things we can do is invite people to step into the mindset of something like 85% of the world, because those are very often the situations that we're talking about. So what we're talking about in terms of defense of freedom of religion or belief, it has to take into account the fact that for most of the people in this part of the world, they don't go to politicians or other organizations that are non-religious in order to know what is right and what is wrong. They actually go to their local faith leader to know what to do that's right or wrong. And therefore, we have seen a movement in the past 10 years or so, I would say even 5 years, of recognition that of how important it is for government to work with faith-based organizations. Because in so many ways, as faith-based organizations, we have the ear of the people. And therefore, some of the other human rights which government would like to address can only be done through faith-based organizations, including our various churches and denominations.
Thank you. Do you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I was just, thank you very much for that. Because I think just maybe at the conceptual level, I think for a long time in the European context, religion has been sort of put into this what we call almost like a conceptual straitjacket. It's either been viewed as a perpetrator or a victim. And so I think what some of also the faith-based organizations and religious representations that are present here have been trying to do in the past years is to sort of free it from that conceptual straitjacket and really try and highlight how religion is a powerful source of sort of positive motivation. And I think that it's much, if I look at the 10 years now that have elapsed, that I've been working in this particular capacity, I see sort of a development. I see how where it's been treated as this in this oppressor-victim lens, like there is progress. We've had quite a few sort of conversations around, what is the contribution of religion to this particular subject of social transformation or that in the European context. But of course, as you mentioned, a lot still needs to be done to sort of raise that awareness. The second thing I wanted to say, and I think that's very important, is that in the context of foreign affairs, like there needs to be that realization that if the understanding of how religion shapes lives and just kind of the societies elsewhere, and you mentioned it, if that understanding is not there, then I don't see how the EU will struggle to meaningfully engage in foreign affairs. Because if you're looking at any kind of subject in any of some of those countries, they're shaped by religion. Like you cannot get an ID card if you do not indicate your religion. Like all of your civil rights are sort of crossed out if you do not say what religious backgrounds you have. And for Europeans, this is foreign because nobody's asking us this question. There, it's the most predominant question that is asked. There, I mean, in this 85% of the rest of the. So I think we have to be very, very aware of that. But also to say that 10 years ago, the EU adopted, or now 10 and a half years ago, guidelines on freedom of religion or belief, and that are meant to really help also EU delegations abroad to engage with this subject. And I think just to say that progress has been made, that has allowed this right to become much more sort of streamlined. But of course, there is still things to be done.
Yeah, I agree with what Rochelle said. I just want to encourage you that even though it seems like in this house, in the parliament, FoRB is not a very popular subject, you are heard. And we can see it in our work. As we work with other EU institutions, it's true that it has been streamlined, and I haven't been around that long as Rochelle, but I can see that even in the past while that I have been doing my work as the EU advocate, I have seen this transformation. And I also want to add maybe one thing when it comes specifically to the European Parliament. I think there is nothing wrong in addressing the situation, not per se from the religious dimension right away. You are working as one house when it comes to human rights. I don't think it's a political issue, even though it's demonstrated this way sometimes, but I think you can just treat your politicians from other groups as your allies, take them on a journey. Start with, for example, what Rochelle mentioned about ID cards in Iran. Start from, the fact that, okay, some people do not have ID, some people do not have identity because they have documents, and then start unpacking it. And at some point, religion will come into place. You're not compromising. You're not saying that it's not no longer your priority. You're just addressing it from a different angle so that you're bringing your friends, other politicians, whatever group they belong to the same realization, because it's a fact, it's not a political matter, like I said. So, yeah.
Yes, we should talk about facts, and the 85% is also good to take into mind, because we are living in a Western world. In the Western Europe, it's quite not religious, but it's not like the rest of the world, so that's good to know, yes. Are there any other questions? Or remarks, or
I might just add, based on what we've just heard, what could we do as people of faith? As I look around the panel,
maybe you can introduce yourself.
I'm Elder Gerard. I'm here with President Johnson.
Okay.
We do a lot of work across Europe. We have 37 countries we're responsible for as kind of a regional area, if you will. As I hear all the different people of faith here, what if we came together? What is the one thing we could do for you and other elected officials to help demonstrate that we are united in this effort? So it makes it easier for you for those you're talking to not go, no religion, but to show that role of the 85% and the positive things they could do, like President Johnson said, in terms of peacemaking, to be answers to the challenges of our culture and our society.
I think what's helpful is to hear the stories and to get some more information, and also the reports is very helpful, because if you have data, it works, facts. It's the start, because otherwise we're talking about images or thoughts, and people like to have facts. So I think that's very helpful. So we're working a lot with open doors, but if you have stories and also coming here and talk to us, of course, that's important. But facts are always working, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions or remarks, or if not, we are going to this. Yes, there is.
Yes.
Yes.
I really liked the remark from Anastasia Hartman when she said, they empower us to act. It made me think of a time several years ago. I was in Nicaragua and I was working there for the organization Actie, and I had the opportunity to communicate with all the local people. We lived far away in the jungle for 3 weeks, and I got to know all the strong women. And then my heart changed. Then I went home and I said, from now on, I want to do something for the women in the world. It has never let me go. And I think this is what we should have, that everybody should get to hear these stories. They should get to know these people. If you have people around you from different cultures, get to know them. See how they are. Then you see that they are so just like you. That we are all the same, all the women all over the world, we're all the same. We love our children, we love our husband. We just want to take care of the ones around us. And that gives us strength. And then if all those women can have this strong influence in the world, they can speak up, we can really change the world. So, thank you for that beautiful remark. It touched my heart.
Thank you for your beautiful words. Yeah.
Yes, I really, what jumped out to me was her comment, Helene Fisher, about how society and its restrictions and rules actually determine how people are persecuted. And I am a missionary myself. I wear my missionary badge. I work together with refugees, women, Islamic women who wear their headscarves. And here in Europe, there's a sort of a culture where they strive for neutrality, to be neutral, to hide religion, because most people don't believe. And I also think that's a huge threat within Europe. If you look at France, for example, female athletes are not allowed to wear their hijabs during the Olympics anymore. Or in French schools, school children are not allowed to wear certain religious attire. If you look at the Netherlands, where I live, we have a new prime minister and we have a new party, and they're trying to forbid hijabs. And I think it's a huge problem, because in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration, it says that we have the freedom to express ourselves in public and in private, right? So I think a religious attire, a religious symbol, a badge, a hijab is also a way of expressing our beliefs, and I think that is a huge threat to religious freedom, what we're facing in Europe right now.
Yeah, if I may jump off of that
Yes,
for a
of
minute.
course.
This is something that, regardless of the religion, very often tends to affect women a lot, because the religious symbols, very often it's women who are asked to dress differently, whether it is the hijab or some form of scarf, or just wearing a skirt and not jeans. You know, there will, and I'm quite familiar with France because I live there. My daughter can't wear a cross when she goes, just couldn't wear, you know, so there are things which say, as you say, you know, don't let us see that you have a faith. That's where we live. Other places, though, say, we want you to look like our faith looks. And very often that shows more for the women, so that the women are then targeted as being different because our religion is more visible to people around us. There are so many organizations that are trying to do work, though. And if I could just add one thing, one of the most recent pieces of research that we've done with gender and religious freedom, we did with a group called the FoRB Women's Alliance. And there's a research report on that website, which I would encourage you to look up. That's FoRB Women's Alliance. And it catalogs, in that we catalog when there are women of faith, different faiths, trying to do things. We went through the research with them and said, okay, what are your main roadblocks to bringing change? So it's not how do you experience persecution, but when you try to address this, what are your main roadblocks? Where do you see innovations? And if you could have some kind of catalyst to accelerate change, what would it be? It's a bit your question. If there were going to be a catalyst, and the answer there is until we have structural change, until you actually have women who are present alongside men in planning society, in making laws, in being in every single level of organizations and society, then we won't have the kind of change that's necessary. Because unless we have women on the committee for a school that is designing the school, then they won't know where to put the toilets for the girls so that it's safe. Sometimes it's as simple as that. And it's not that the men didn't think it was the right, oh yeah, we have to figure out where to put the women's. It's just they don't know the dynamic. So they don't know where to put it. And all of that lack of integration of women, we might just say, well, it's a bit unfortunate, but it has nothing to do with FoRB. It has everything to do with FoRB. Because every single vulnerability can be exploited for religious persecution. So unless we as people of faith become advocates for women's equal rights in the courts, women's equal place in administration, in making decisions, then we make ourselves vulnerable, because every vulnerability for women is a vulnerability for our faith. So if we're not in there accelerating that, then we cannot just sit back and say, I didn't know, oh, by the way, we don't believe in women in leadership. But no, we just want protection. But we don't want them bringing their gifts, right? You spoke about that, bringing their gifts, bringing their knowledge, bringing their insights. So we actually need to invite together dialogue so that we can bring change as communities, because we live in communities, let's face it. We all live as men and women in communities, in society. Anyway, I would encourage you to look at that, because there are also some other very interesting things for this panel.
Yes, thank you. Another question, one before we go to the next panel? Here, yes.
So I would be interested to know, so I'm from Europe very much, and I'm not going to be able to travel. I have little children, but I would like to make a difference. And I'm part of the Relief Society, so we have a sisterhood. So what could we do in our little sphere that doesn't make a difference? Because I imagine it's going to happen more and more in Europe as well, in different ways, because we have people that don't have the same faith. I know that when I went to school and I said I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, I wasn't marginalized, but I was said, you're different, and that was 10 years ago. But we also have refugees, so it is still not at all comparable to other countries. I'm not comparing that, but what can we do here? Because I'm not going to be able to do much about the 85%.
Is there somebody who likes to answer? Yeah.
I'm always happy to be really embarrassed. But
please feel free.
It's true that most people don't have the chance to travel the way we heard about, which is such a precious thing, isn't it? I can go, I can hear firsthand, and maybe I can try and make a difference for those 3 weeks that I'm there, or the 3 months or whatever. But no, I mean, that's not most of our realities. And I thank you so much for bringing that up. So what can we do here? Well, of course, we can work within our own communities in trying to really empower both men and women equally. Honestly, it's how we raise our kids. Do we raise our women, our boys and girls, more or less the same, to say you have the same possible future? One of the other things that we can do is say, no matter what happens to you, you do not lose your place in this community. And that is one of the key things that we found is the way we build resilient faith communities. And so we created a program for that, which is very detailed, very complex, but it goes deeply into the fact of we must change our own mindsets. If we think that something that happens to my sister will mean that I no longer welcome her into my home, I no longer think she has a future in the community, I no longer think she's good enough to marry my son, whatever it is, then I become complicit. And until we address that sort of dynamic that happens within our own communities, where we are not places that are safe and of belonging, then maybe we don't need to go too far outside our own door to find things to do.
Can I just add to that? Because I really think that one of the most powerful things that can be done for freedom of religion or belief is to go up to other communities and really get to know them. So who are, I don't know, in your neighborhood, who are the people of other faiths, of other beliefs? How can you not just sort of like passively coexist with them, but really actively reach out to them, get to know them, understand them, get to know their faith, and then see how together you can really sort of work towards the improvement of the neighborhood, for instance, in which you live. You know, that doesn't require travel. It's a very simple, daily, practical thing. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that any of us can do to uphold the freedom of religion or belief, is to reach out to all religious communities and work with them.
May I add something to that?
The final words, yes.
Well, as a member of the Relief Society, you have a sphere of influence. And right now, as a mother of young children, that sphere of influence may feel small. But if you influence your own children to recognize and respect their brothers and sisters who may look different from them, who may practice in religious ways different from them, if you work on those 2 or 3 or however many your flock are right now, that'll make a difference. And there'll be another season in your life, I promise, when those children are not under your constant care. Well, you will have an opportunity to stretch your wings broader. And so it was my invitation today, where are you right now? What can you do today to make a difference? And helping your children develop tolerance and respect for those that are different from them will make the world of difference.
Thank you. With these beautiful words, we close this panel, and I hand over the floor to Mr. Francisco de Lilo or Leo?
Lilo.
Lilo. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Haga. I'm Francesco Di Lillo, the Director for EU and International Affairs for the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints. And again, thank you so much for hosting this event. I'm surrounded by wonderful women's leaders, and I've been impressed and inspired by the words of the first panel, which focused on experiences. Our second panel will focus on the strategies and possible solutions. Our two speakers will show us will share with us their experience and their perspective from the multilateral organization side of the work. Camille N will share some of her work and perspective from the UN side, and Dr. Susan Kerr will share about her work at the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights at the OSCE. So I'll start introducing Ms. N. She was elected the president of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women at the United Nations in Geneva in April 2021, strengthening cohesion among women UN entities in Geneva. She's the vice president of the Women's Federation for World Peace International, and the director for the Women Federation for World Peace Office for the United Nations Relations globally. She has been leading the advocacy team at the United Nations in Geneva since 1997 and is active on various committees and task forces. More on her bio in the packet in front of you.
Thank you.
Caroline.
Yes, thank you so much for this this opportunity to be here. I must say, this room completely breaks my concept about what is possible at the European Parliament, actually. The United Nations in Geneva is kind of my workplace, and even though we have, of course, we are not just Europe, we are the world, and of course there are more countries represented who are, I would say, a little bit more open to religion and spirituality. But there's still something strongly European in Geneva, as a matter of fact. So I am not an expert on freedom of religion and belief. Actually, my husband works in that field. But I lead an organization. I work within an organization that is faith-inspired, I would say, the Women's Federation. And in my, for instance, currently I am working on Beijing plus 30. We are preparing ourselves, preparing working groups in the 12 critical areas and preparing for Beijing plus 30. And I'm leaving on Wednesday for the Commission on the Status of Women in New York. So even though this could seem kind of foreign to me, I feel so at home, and I learned so much actually from you today, because at heart, this desire that religion, spirituality could become more an obvious part of, diplomatic relations at the UN. And I will maybe go to my speech a little bit that I wrote up. I have the greatest respect, of course, for those activists and human rights defenders who work in this area of freedom of religion or belief. But maybe today I will look at it more in a sort of a common sense and even personal way, but also in the context of my work at the UN. Of course, we don't need to, this crowd, we don't need to talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. This is your daily life, I know. But I just wanted to make the point that, of course, we can read it, but it's very much about reading between the lines, actually, of that, that right that we have to teach, practice, worship, and observe our own faith. My NGO, a faith-based NGO, has a simple vision statement, because we are not at the UN as a faith-based organization. We are representing more the humanitarian and the education side of our work. But the simple statement is women working together to realize one global family rooted in a culture of sustainable peace. So there's nothing religious, there's no God, there's not even a sacred there, but actually if you look at that, it's very much, in some ways it's very religious, even that we believe these things are possible. Many people in society don't really see things like that, but that vision and the work that we do has actually given us the highest level of accreditation at the United Nations, and I would say has opened many doors. Our work is very substantive, and I would say the people that I work with, especially in my work as the president of the Committee on the Status of Women, so we have 30 different international ECOSOC accredited NGOs in my committee. And my way of leading, I almost feel like not reading my speech, actually. Maybe I shouldn't, because what I would really want to say is that I have experienced persecution very much when I first walked into the United Nations. And because people know who you are and what organization you represent, huh? And sometimes they just judge you like that. So you have to work on even the United Nations gives you credentials. We submit all the papers, and for that reason, for all the work we are doing all around the world, not converting people, but really building societies, working with women, and inspiring leadership of women in different communities, 120 nations. Still, people have concepts, about what a person from a certain faith might be like, or have to offer. So my story is maybe that I went from being this very, kind of misunderstood person who was, I joined several different committees, including the Committee on the Status of Women, of course, but also Human Rights Education, and sort of worked myself up from the bottom, and found that just by applying the principles of religion, and that that you can very much win the heart and the trust of people. Of course, we can. I can go, and I don't think this is the right crowd in some ways even to have to say this, but in some cases we feel we have the right to just be able to flamboyantly profess our faith, and that people should understand, and it shouldn't put people off. But actually, I would say that in terms of leadership in society, and if I really want to endear others to what my faith has to offer, I have to really look and see where people are at. And of course, as we heard today, we are in Europe, and I even have, I'm a mother of 7 children. Even 2 of my daughters, when I bring up religion, even the word religion causes them to flinch, actually, which is very sad. But I still take it like that, anyway, that will change. We continue to love them and support them, and the environment in our society is very hostile in many ways. So living faith is a soft power, and sharing those values, which also we've heard today, values like generosity, truthfulness, compassion in terms of leadership, sacrificing recognition for the benefit of others. I work to bring forward the best that my faith has to offer. Maybe this is one of the most important points of what I want to say, is without anyone feeling outside of the circle. So if I am a leader in any way of a multi-faith and also non-faith community, I have to really, in fact, it's here about inspire inclusion. I have to really think those that might feel the most easily excluded have to be taken, special care has to be taken for them. And we know, of course, leadership is not about being the best, but it's about getting the best out of as many people as possible. So I would like to just share a short story, because I have done many different projects and programs while working at the United Nations, especially with young people. And I have internship programs going on all the time, 3 or 4 times a year. And we have, working together with the ambassador, the mission of Indonesia and the Philippines, we, together with my husband's NGO, we reached out to young members of local religious communities in Geneva in order asking them to participate in an interfaith youth council Model UN project. So over the last 13 plus years, and probably 12, I think at least 12 large events at the United Nations, a couple of times at the World Council of Churches, we had youth representing as many as 9 religions sitting together in UN meeting rooms with ambassadors, with religious leaders, all curious to see what they were going to say and how easily they could relate together or not. And they would work out trying to reach consensus in recommending solutions for the governments about current global crises. So each time we had a different problem they were working on. Interestingly, when they met together and worked together, they did not feel the need to promote their own religion. There was no rule saying you cannot promote your own religion. But actually these young people did not feel that, and rather they used the practical wisdom of their upbringing in their religious communities, in their families, to project very innovative solutions that got the attention of many of these ambassadors and these religious leaders. At that time, we were in fact promoting the idea of an interreligious council at the United Nations in New York. And but interestingly, while in the first meeting that we had, while they were working out their recommendations, they discovered that Ramadan, the Muslim holy and fasting, had just begun. And they all decided together, there were about 22 young people at that time, they decided unanimously to experience the practice together, and they all determined to fast. They went on after that to write an accord, a peace accord among religions. So they were, each one had the feel, they were representing their faith in this body, not themselves personally. But each one was very much affected by that experience, and has, over the years, I'm still close to many of these people, and it was like some kind of a turning point in their understanding about what is peace, and is peace really possible? So the broader theme of today's meeting is about inclusion, inspiring inclusion, which is quite a very soft kind of way of saying it. But I remember when I first came to the United Nations back in the 90s, the word tolerance was being thrown around as if it was the highest goal. Currently, and I think we all agree with that, tolerance is really the very first basic step. No one is free to develop in an environment where they are merely tolerated, and I think this has been alluded to in different speakers, endured. There is no dignity, there is no true respect there. Yes, there is, of course, we're talking about the right to be able to practice our faith. But we all know, I think a true religious person understands that that is not the goal. The goal is really to live in peace together and to provide a place, a platform where people of all faiths or not can be able to live in peace. And those, I think, who have a faith-based understanding of life have more responsibility for those maybe outside the realm of faith, to be able to make sure that they also feel included. Religion, of course, also all religions say that humanity, of course, is an interconnected body, often described as a family, a benevolent source. But, and I think no one can deny that that paradigm advances peace, burden sharing, prosperity. Drafters of many standard-setting documents at the UN and elsewhere find ways to allude to religious concepts and aspirations. I've had so many experiences in my work where I was branded for my faith before getting started, as I mentioned, but it made me stronger. Sometimes in those moments I chose not to fight back by demanding recognition of my religion, as the environment was perhaps too hostile to go that way, but to come in through a different door and quietly contribute to the success of the team, the project. People change. People can change dramatically. Some of the most convinced persecutors became the greatest defenders, and my committee members. Currently, my NGO, due to its faith-inspired founding, is undergoing a very unjust persecution in Japan. Our long-labored schools in developing countries, built over our 30-year history, the successful, well-documented humanitarian projects we funded over 30 years, volunteers who left the comfort of their homes to invest in others, are being scrutinized ruthlessly and falsely. We know what good has been done for these communities. In fact, from one week to the next, when this media campaign began in Japan, Women's Federation Japan lost almost 2,000 members. It's a huge organization. People writing letters in and kind of wanting to take back their membership just because of the media saying things that actually didn't match what they knew from their own personal experience. Very, very painful. But actually, I just heard that many of these people are now coming back because they remember, actually, the effect that those members of the Women's Federation in their communities have had on them. So inspiring inclusion means promoting the best in the other. Lines between religion and values are like two sides of the same coin. There shouldn't be any contradiction. Is a leader of an organization, I want to keep my team with me, so I must be wise. There's always danger of one-sided claiming of rights, and I'm not talking, of course, about extreme cases of or existential threats based on religion, but the more soft sell of faith and religion and values. A society's greatness can easily be measured by how it cares for its most vulnerable, and we know religions are very much intertwined in that. Families do the same. But I cannot forget that I do not just represent me, I do not just represent my faith, my gender, my culture, my nation, but that I am much larger than that. I represent a global family or global citizenship, and I have to always be aware of those who are not included. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I had not so many strategies. I a little bit, anyway, came down to my own personal experience.
And oftentimes the heart speaks better than anything else. Thank you. Next is Susan, Dr. Susan Kerr. Susan is the Senior Advisor on Freedom of Religious Belief at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe at the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. Prior to working for ODIHR, Susan engaged in human rights consultancy work, including the FoRB learning platform. She also led the Office of Human Rights for the Human Rights Organization CSW. And she was elected, I have to read this, she was elected to serve 4 consecutive mandates for the Board of Coordinators of the European Platform Against Religious Intolerance and Discrimination. Because of these 4 years, I had the pleasure of serving at least 1 or maybe 2 with you, and it was a great experience. So Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much to Ms. Haga for hosting this event, and also to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints European Union Office for facilitating. And it seems very fitting indeed to be back in Brussels this year to speak at an event on freedom of religion or belief when we think of the EU guidelines 10-year anniversary, as Ms. Bayani also referred to. And what a great set of guidelines they are, and how much progress has actually been made in this area, and how wonderful that we're not at an event where we're discussing the very basics of what is freedom of religion or belief. And I have spoken at many such events, but we're actually looking at an intersection as well. We're looking at freedom of religion or belief as it intersects with gender equality and women's rights. And so in the time that I have, and I'm aware that time is short, I'd like to discuss how the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights works on women's right to freedom of religion or belief. But before I can discuss how, maybe I need to say why. Because as you note, I work for a security organization. So why would a security organization work on freedom of religion or belief? And the answer is really that the OSCE sees security not only as this politico-military dimension of security or environmental and economic dimensions of security, but also as having this very strong human dimension. And the human dimension, of course, encompasses human rights, the rule of law, democracy. So when we look at this, we call it a comprehensive vision of security. And different OSCE participating states, and there are 57 OSCE participating states, have committed themselves to protecting and promoting, respecting freedom of religion or belief. They've also committed themselves to advancing this promotion of women's equality with men in different areas, be it political, social, economic or cultural. And so this is why we work on this intersection. And to be successful, OSCE participating states, and I should note that all EU member states are also OSCE participating states, must remove a range of barriers that impede women's effective participation in these areas, including by identifying and addressing gaps in the implementation of each individual's fundamental human rights. So additionally, of course, we could talk about non-discrimination, that they should do so without discriminating against different groups, women or men, and they're young or old, disabled or not. And we could look at different intersections. It's very important that we do that actually when we work on this, that we don't just look at women as one group, because we know as women in the room that we are all different, that we all have different trajectories. Many of us have different religious or belief convictions, and that's important. That's an important part of our identity and our lived reality. So as ODIHR, our mandate is to assist the participating states in implementing their commitments and to empower civil society organisations. And we work then to promote women's right to FoRB in a number of ways. I will only touch upon 3 for the sake of time. But firstly, we conduct needs assessments and consultations to try to really understand what the problems are. And we can look at these as ends in themselves, just understanding, bringing in that knowledge, but also bringing discussion amongst the various people around the table in the consultations. But of course, consultations, research shouldn't be ends in themselves, but they should be means to implement the knowledge, place the knowledge into our programming, and that's what we do, and into our resources. On our resources, I should also note that one activity that ODIHR colleagues engage in is hate crime reporting. And this data that they collect is disaggregated on the grounds of gender and also religion or belief bias motivation. And as I know, they will soon put out a call to have civil society organisations contribute. I would note that if you're a civil society organisation here today, ODIHR would be very happy to hear of your experiences and to collect any submissions that you have and any data that you have of hate crimes occurring within your communities across the OSCE area. On our specific resources in the Freedom of Religion or Belief programme, one that we have produced is a video series on getting the right to freedom of religion or belief right. It's very watchable. It's a collection of social media sized videos. And one of the reasons that we put together this series was to really try to combat some of the misunderstandings around the right. For example, often when I conduct training, which is another thing that we do, one of the questions that I like to throw out at the beginning is, which religions are protected by freedom of religion or belief? Now, as you're a knowledgeable audience, you will appreciate that no religion is protected. Okay, people are protected. But often the answer from someone who thinks they're being very smart is, all religions are protected. And when I throw out the same question with beliefs, but all beliefs, and the same response, of course, people are protected. But one of the videos that we made is on this intersection as well. We wanted to show that women and men may face different violations of freedom of religion or belief. And so if you're interested, I would direct you to our website to have a look at that video series. I think it's got a wealth of material on different misunderstandings around the right. Another area of our work then would be publications. We published a policy guidance on freedom of religion or belief and security, which integrates some of the issues actually that we heard actually from this panel today, but tries to take a gender perspective throughout. And we are actually in the process of producing new resources as well. So at present we're looking to produce a guide. We're looking to produce. We produced a guide. We're waiting for it to go past our editor. We've produced a guide on interfaith and interreligious dialogue and partnerships. And within that guide, we also try to take a gender perspective. For example, if we think of the interfaith scene, often we see a preponderance of older men engaged in this, and we have to find ways to encourage more women to engage. So, for example, around language, we could say, speaking of religious actors perhaps, instead of just religious leaders. Looking at things like perhaps arranging childcare or looking at accessible venues when hosting events would be important. We need to find ways to break down the barriers for women to participate in these types of fora. And as we know, interfaith and interreligious dialogues and partnerships, as Ms. Bayani mentioned before, they increase our understanding of each other, and they're really important in building freedom of religion or belief from the grassroots up. We're also producing, and I should maybe have mentioned this first, a freedom of religion or belief and gender equality explainer series, where we're looking at different aspects of women's right to FoRB. So the first one, which will also come out in a couple of months' time, is looking at freedom of religion or belief and gender equality in the labour market. But we're also planning to look at areas such as education, and in fact there are a number of different areas that our panel of experts on freedom of religion or belief who assist us in our work are very excited to get started on. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We're aware that there are other organisations that have been working on this. Maybe over the last, I think, 5-7 years, we've seen more and more resources appearing, but still there's a lack of disaggregated data on some topics and just a lack of awareness of these intersections, and that's something that we're looking to address. And then lastly, I'd like to just briefly mention our programmatic work. For the sake of time, I will just mention that we deliver a lot of training, and within that we try always to take a gender perspective and to encourage people to sitting around the table to imagine perhaps that they were in the situations themselves. I think is a very, very important way of doing that. One exciting initiative that we're involved in terms of training is the Change Project. Now this is a bigger umbrella project, a flagship project I would say of ODIHR, and within that there is a component on freedom of religion or belief. And what we're doing within that is bringing together religious or belief community leaders and feminists and people working on women's rights. And we found this to be a very valuable way of educating both groups actually about what is freedom of religion or belief, so that women's organisations can more effectively advocate for this right. And as was mentioned before, again by Ms. Bayani, sorry to keep going back to your points, but there is often this clash, this perceived clash between the two. And it's important to get over that and to say, well, actually, if you really want to advocate for women's rights, you need to look at all of them, because all rights are interconnected, interrelated, and must be upheld together. And at the same time, we encourage religious or belief community leaders to look at issues like violence against women, how they can stem these problems within their own communities. I will end there because I'm sure that you want to ask a couple of questions, and yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. Please join me in thanking. True, I do have a couple of questions for both of you, but in the interest of time and in order to leave also some time for concluding remarks for Ms. Haga, I would say we have about 7 minutes, you think, for questions?
Then, okay, yeah.
Perfect.
It's
so we do have
to discuss it.
So we have to. We do have time for you to ask questions to the panel, to Susan and Carolyn. Jose Luis.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to Madame Haga for the organization. So, after your presentations, which were balancing heart and mind, I would say, I like that part because I'm not used. I've been here for 13 years in the parliament, and sometimes I miss these experience-based testimonies. But at the same time, I have other problems concerning balancing faith and reason. This is all the time, 2,000 years story. So I go to the intellectual side that you, Rachel, was mentioning. I followed the hearing of the U.S. Associate Judge appointment. And in the hearing, I think it was a U.S. congressman asked the lady, the candidate, what is a woman? And she said, I cannot define it. I'm not a biologist. So I have a problem if we talk about women's rights, because in our current context in Western world, we are putting into question the basics of what is a woman, first. Second, the question, I totally agree with you that freedom of religion does not protect religions, right? I have, at the time of the EU guidelines on freedom of religion, that, by the way, for the knowledge of the audience, were drafted by 2 French diplomats. And this is not by chance. It is not by chance that the External Action Service was framed following the French model. So we can understand better why the External Action Service has been so reluctant for many years. Recently, much less, absolutely, and I agree that there has been some improvements, even though there are paradoxical situations, because there are improvements in some cases and regression in others. So the picture is not clear. We were fighting a lot, fighting in the good sense, debating, they were very open, defending that religious freedom is an individual right, but it's also a right for communities and institutions. And they were saying, no, it's an individual right with collective consequences. It's not the same. It's not the same. The third issue I want to mention is the question of faith reason, because we talk about religious freedom, that's fine, freedom of religion, but actually the right is not that. The right is the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. We all know that. But I just want to point out that this is a single freedom, not like the former UN rapporteur on religion said, there are 3 rights. No, there is one right with 3 dimensions, which is totally different. Because we cannot isolate religion from conscience and thought. And most of the problems we have here in the Western countries is not about religion, most of the times. It's about conscience. For example, in education, in health issues. So I want to bring the conscience dimension even from thought through the compelled speech, for example. And again, with the question of balancing faith and reason, it comes to my mind the intellectual problem of the conflicting. By background, I'm a lawyer, and of course there are conflicts. If not, there are not cases at the courts, and we are full of cases in freedom of religion since the 70s, at least. And we have now a pile of topics. For example, I was reading the other day a U.S. decision of the Alabama Supreme Court, about the religious dimension of yoga. Because in the state schools in Alabama, there was a ban of yoga, or teaching yoga in state schools for children, because it's related to a certain religion, Hindu and so on. Now it has been lifted. But making clear, like they cannot pronounce the word namaste, because this is religious. You see? So there are a lot of, just to bring, the disruptive dimension of the issue, because when it comes to experience, human tendency just to understand others. I mean, more or less, in terms of the human common nature. But when it comes to situations like this, maybe the conflict appears and we have to develop certain rules and criteria to define. Thanks. And sorry for the time.
Thank you, Service. Would you like to address?
Yes, so I would actually just come to what you said on freedom of thought. One of the things that we're working on, but I didn't mention today because we're still sort of looking into it, is on freedom of thought. We're planning to produce an explainer as well, which is a sort of fact sheet outlining what it is. For some, it seems quite obvious what their thought is, and for others, it's highly philosophical. But of course, it's incredibly important, because that aspect of freedom of religion or belief is to be absolutely protected. So what does that mean in the light of, let's say, new advances in technology? We could look at the way that algorithms, for example, may affect our choices online. Is
Facial
that
recognition.
there are many different facets we could look at, but I think that's something that's incredibly important, and I think it will be more and more topic of discussion, let's say, over the next years.
Thank you, Susan. Other questions? Did you raise your hand? Okay, I do have a question then for Caroline that I wanted to follow up as part of your presentation, which is, as the president of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women, how do you see the role of civil society organizations within that context in the advancement of freedom of religion or belief for women?
Okay. Well, I would see that as a living example of, of how we could work through those kind of concepts and misunderstandings that we have of one another in the process of, as we work together to solve issues not related obviously to religion. We are sort of rubbing each other and breaking down. I know in my team that I have some who are very skeptical about religion, and it used to be in the forefront of their mind, and I would say now it's in the back of their mind, actually. And the fact is, because as we work together and these, and we work with a certain set of values, and we work with a focus on benefiting others, and within this larger vision of a global, peaceful, prosperous community, that it's quite remarkable how we all change. Whatever kind of concepts we might have had against one group or another, or one culture or thought, and it's, yeah, I can't say too much because, as I said, we're not really working on freedom of religion and belief, but almost many of the other human rights, yes. But it's like it's like a little microcosm, I would say, of society, to see how we come together and break down many barriers, among us, but very clearly the one related to freedom of religion and belief, because in fact in my executive team we are three of 7. We are either faith-inspired or faith-based NGOs, including Bahá'í Bahá'í has just actually joined our committee now then in Geneva, and you're actually the representative of your community as vice president, and it is clear to me the benefit of even having a small team of religious-minded women working together to solve problems. Actually, that I think it's a very powerful kind of teamwork when we can work together. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have 5 minutes left.
Oh, I don't need 5 minutes. I think it's very important to say thanks to all of you, because without you we wouldn't have had this meeting here. And we heard a lot of very interesting things, and what I will remember is that several things. I think what you said, that 20 years ago it was a topic not very normal to talk about, and now it's more normal to talk about freedom of religion, and also with regard of the status of women and the importance of women in it. So I think that's good to know, because we are not there yet, but it's improving, so that's encouraging, and we can work on that together. So it's very nice to know you now, and to know more about your church as well, because that's new for me, but very interesting, and I feel connected. And I think one of the most important things I will remember is that you said religious freedom of women is a key component of global peace. And we started with that, and I think it's something, a red line through all the stories we heard, I think, because we are all looking for peace and for communities who live together in harmony, and women have an important role in it, and how can we help women? And I think we live here in the western of Europe, which is not very religious, but as you told, 85% of the world is religious. So that's important to take into account when we talk about this topic. So I've made notes, and I will take it with me, and because it will be on the agenda again and again, and it's helpful for me to talk with you and to hear your stories. So please send me your information if you have more, and also to the other MEPs, because what we're talking about, we have to put it on the agenda again and again, and you are very helpful with this. So thank you very much, and we can of course talk to each other afterwards. Unfortunately, I have to leave because I have to vote, so the day here never ends. But of course you can talk to each other, and thank you, and applause for all the speakers.